Welcome back to the strange sagas of Sabrina Summers, the uncooperative flying carpet. Chapter 19. Grey sky showed through the leaves again. The bats had gone. Clyde had stopped farting, and a gentle breeze blew away the remaining smell. We patted Clyde, congratulating him and making a great fuss of him. I think that his emissions affected the bats by disrupting their magnetic compasses, Olive told us. Annoying, mean, whiny though she is, Olive is still one of the cleverest kids at our school. It's what they used to navigate. Without that, they couldn't tell where they were going, so they flew away, she explained. Clyde gave a tiny purr of happiness. His work now was done. So, now what? Olive, Rory and Persis all looked at me. I rolled my eyes and thought about how nice it would be if someone else made a decision just once. Olive must have read my mind. She spoke up. I think we should keep going along the path through the woods, she said. It must come to an end eventually, and we can't go back that way, she added, pointing toward the gingerbread cottage and the direction in which the bats had flown. When I wished that someone else would make a decision, I hadn't meant her. But she was right. There was nothing else for it. I agree, I said. Well done, Olive, I added, a little ashamed that I had been jealous. We began walking again. Persis led the way alongside Clyde. They were followed by Olive, then me, then Rory. It was starting to get really dark, and the trees seemed to be thicker. We could hardly see where to put our feet, even though the crushed stones that made up the path gave off a very faint white light. We were a little jumpy after the encounter with the trees that could move, and then the witch's troop of trained bats. Every rustling leaf and groaning branch made one of us jump, which made the rest of us jump. Once I felt something tickle the back of my neck, and I almost leapt out of my skin, but it was just a cobweb that I had brushed past. We continued on our way. We were too tired and unsettled to speak. We just wanted to be out of this horrible forest and back in the fresh air again. We focused on putting one foot in front of the other again and again and again until we thought we couldn't manage one more step. Hey guys, I think we're nearly there, Persis called from up ahead. The trees are thinning out. She passed the message to Olive, who passed it on to me. I turned my head to pass it back to Rory. But Rory was no longer behind me. My first thought was that he had better not be messing around or he would be in trouble with me. Then the raw fear swept over me, paralysing my limbs and choking my voice in my throat. There could be only one reason. He had been the last in line, and the witch had obviously crept up after us and taken him. I managed to force out a little croak, and Olive and Persis realised something was wrong. They hurried back to me with worry in their eyes. Then they saw that I was alone, and panic replaced the worry. "Rory!" screamed Persis as loudly as she could. At first, all we heard was more rustling. Was that him? Was it someone or something taking Rory away? We all yelled his name together. Even Clyde whinnied along with us. All we heard was the sound of rustling in the undergrowth. Then came the sound of Rory's young voice, laughing and laughing. Oh boy, he was off with Russell again. "You saw dust on them," he gasped out. He was giggling too hard to talk properly. "Oh, thanks, Russell," he said in a calmer voice. "Welcome," rumbled the familiar tree-like voice, which appeared to come from the very centre of Russell's trunk. "So when the path forks, we go right?" Rory was asking him. The leaves rustled again, which I assumed was the tree equivalent of nodding. When Rory and Russell came into view, I glared at them. "You have to quit running off like that," I said, through teeth that were clenched so hard my jaw ached. "We thought something bad had happened to you." Rory took one look at my furious, frightened face and dipped his head. "Sorry," he muttered. "I just noticed Russell following us and asked him for a lift. My legs were tired." "All our legs are tired," I pointed out. "Just say something next time, okay?" Rory nodded, but he always does that. It looks like he cares about being yelled at, but he takes no notice at all. I sighed. I had more important things to worry about. We need to get out of here and find some shelter. It's getting cold. I shivered as I spoke. It was night now, and the temperature had dropped. Rory raised his hand and waved bye-bye to his new best friend and walked over to me. "Russell says we take the right-hand path when the road splits when we come to it," he said. "He's pretty cool, isn't he? Did you know he's 253 years old? He can walk, but not very fast, and he hates that witch who chased us. Oh, and he's got a secret crush on an elm tree, but he's too shy to tell her." I led the way back to Clyde, shaking my head to myself. A lovesick talking tree called Russell was my brother's best friend. This particular lovesick talking tree was right, though. We soon found a fork in the path, turned right and followed Clyde along the track for only another 15 minutes before we were out of the forest at last. I turned up my face to the moon and I breathed deeply. Open space, and the smell of decaying leaves was gone. Bliss. We were surrounded by, guess what? More fields. More fields, just like the ones on the other side of the woods. In spite of the full moon riding high in the sky, it was still extremely dark. There was no way we could continue until morning. We were going to have to bed down for the night. Clyde solved the problem for us. He had turned from the path and walked into a field with heaped haystacks dotted across the ground. He stopped by the first one and stood there looking at us. "I think he wants to sleep there, in that haystack," said Rory, who was enjoying his newfound position as best buddy to all magical creatures. I pinched my lower lip and thought about it. It would be cosy, and we would be camouflaged from any bats flying overhead. I gave a little nod. It was a pretty good idea. We became little bunny rabbits and burrowed deep into the pile of hay, sniffing its warm scent. One by one, and before I could manage to suggest that we take it in turns to keep guard, we fell deeply asleep. Chapter 20. We woke up the next morning to find a unicorn eating our bed. "Clyde," I said crossly, "we were fast asleep, and that's like eating our house, by the way." I climbed out of the haystack and gingerly touched my scalp. Luckily, the wounds left by the bats seemed to be healing. Persis scrabbled out on her hands and knees and stood up with an enormous yawn. She scratched her belly and picked some straw from her braids. "Well, it's probably only fair, really, seeing as we ate Witchy Woo's gingerbread cottage," she pointed out, reasonably enough. "You know, what goes around comes around," she said. Rory rolled out of the haystack and stared at her. This was a new concept for him. "So, if you're mean to someone, then someone else will be mean to you later on?" he asked, and she nodded. He looked a little bit worried. "I know what you mean," he told her. "One time Bridget wouldn't let me have a sleepover on a school night, which I decided was mean of her, so I put a fake spider in her slippers, which in return was mean of me. She screamed the house down," he finished with a satisfied smile. Persis opened her mouth to explain that wasn't quite what she meant, but she closed it again and shook her head instead. Well, Rory might not have understood the idea of being nice to people so that they will be nice to you, but he had reminded us why we were even here at all. Bridget. Where had she vanished to? She must have seen us all laying on the ground when she landed in Droffinia and had just gone off and left us. "We need to find Bridget," I said. I looked over at Clyde. "Do you know where she is?" I asked him. I was tired of all this pointless wandering around. Also, I was hungry again. I had half a haystack stuck in my annoying hair, and I really just wanted to go home. Clyde dipped his head once. Olive came up to me. She looked even worse than she had yesterday. Straw peeked out of her dress, her leaf shoes had disintegrated, and she was even dirtier than before. I think he said yes, she declared. I supposed she was doing her best to fit in with the rest of us. After all, she hadn't complained for ages. She pushed forward to talk to Clyde. Clyde, can you lead us to where she is? She demanded. Another dip of the head. How far away is it? I tried. Nothing. Then Olive realised something. He can only answer yes or no, like that game from elementary school, Olive explained. Clyde, if we carry on walking, will we get there today? He nodded again. She pointed up the path away from Scary Forest. Is that the way? She asked, getting excited. He nodded. Fantastic! She rubbed her hands together, which sent clouds of black grime into the air, but I shared her enthusiasm. Come on, troops, I called out. Let's hit the road again. Clyde says Bridget went that way, and it's not too far. In a few minutes we were assembled and marching along, leaving bits of hay in our wake, like Hansel and Gretel leaving the trail. Magpies and sparrows swooped down after us to collect it for their nests. Behind us, Clyde nodded his head again, and then he shook it. A piece of straw was caught in his mane, and it was irritating him. After shaking his head vigorously, he finally dislodged it. Chapter 21. So we did a bit more of what we were getting pretty good at. We walked. Olive had created a new pair of leaf shoes. She's practically an expert at making them now. This pair had laces that went up her ankles. I was pretty sure that the next pair would even have heels at this rate. We began to see signs that human beings lived nearby. The fields became smaller and were neat shapes, with smart wooden fences instead of scattered heaps of stones. There were gates too, some roped shut. The track we followed became wider and smoother, and we spotted plumes of smoke in the far distance. Smoke. Smoke meant that there were welcoming fires in warm houses, freshly baked bread, comfortable chairs, and places to wash. We were all desperate to brush our teeth, as apparently our mouths felt and smelt, as if small rodents had crawled in there to die. You can thank Rory for that charming image. He told me that was how my breath smelled when I leaned close to ask him if he was okay. Soon we could even pick up the scent of wood smoke. Without any need for discussion, we increased our pace until we were hurrying along. After another bit of walking, we saw some low stone buildings with thatched roofs in the hazy distance. As we got closer, we noticed that some of the other buildings were wooden, with pointed roofs and ornate paintings around their arched windows. Then we saw people. Real, ordinary human people. Admittedly, they were dressed in weird old-fashioned clothes like ours, but we could hear them now, and they were talking English. Hey, Jack, called out one man who was leading an ox cart piled high with pumpkins. Don't forget to feed the pigs. Okay, Uncle Jack, I will, a younger guy replied as he hurried past with a bucket full of carrot tops and potato peelings. My stomach growled. Why isn't anyone looking at us? Olive wondered. I mean, we look pretty strange, she said, gesturing at Rory in particular. I thought about it. Well, I assume it's because we don't look strange for here, just for 20th century Mellis. My stomach growled again, louder this time. I looked around to see if I could find somewhere that might give us food, but Persis was way ahead of me. Look, an inn, she said. We can just check in there. An inn what? Rory was puzzled. No, doofus. I mean an inn. It's kind of like a cafe with rooms above where you can sleep. We stayed in one when we went to Vermont last fall. It was awesome. I even had a 4-poster bed. Food, bed, and presumably showers. It sounded like just the place for us. Unfortunately, we had one problem. I hate to be the one to pour cold water on your so-called ideas, sniped Olive, but we have no money. She was right. We straggled to a stop and wondered what to do. Luckily for you losers, I have a plan, she said with a smirk, and strode over to the dingy building. The inn had walls made from thick stone with tiny holes cut into them to allow light in and smoke out. It looked a bit grubby, and weeds grew outside in amongst the vegetables and flowers that surrounded it. A wooden sign swung from a pole outside the door. It read, "The Inn of the Fluffy Kitten," in swirly writing. The sign was made from wooden planks nailed together, and on it someone had painted an image of a very fluffy kitten. The kitten was grey, with a white tip on its tail, and it had orange eyes. Surely, with a name like that, the inn had to be safe. Olive opened the door, and we began to follow her. As I passed beneath the sign, I thought I heard a tiny meow, and I looked up. Either my eyes were playing tricks on me, or the kitten had changed position. I squinted at it, but I saw nothing, and I turned away. I heard another meow and whirled back. The kitten had definitely moved. Now it sat with its back to me. I stared again for a long minute before deciding that the kitten had been teasing me and was now bored with the game. I followed Olive and the others inside and immediately wished I hadn't. It reeked of smelly clothes. The floor was gritty underfoot, and all the furniture, rough wooden benches, rickety tables, and a long serving bar, was covered in sticky stuff that I didn't want to know about. "Excuse me," Olive called out. You could just tell she was used to giving orders and then having them obeyed. "Excuse me, who is in charge here?" 3 exceedingly hairy, short men who were clutching metal mugs in their hands turned to stare at her and then turned away. A head popped up from behind the serving bar. It was a boy, perhaps 14 years old, with straw-coloured hair, cute dimples, and clear blue eyes. He met Olive's gaze. "I'm in charge," he said. "Well, my man, my friends and I need a room, stabling for our unicorn, and refreshments. Oh, and we don't have any money." Chapter 22. That was her plan? Just to tell the truth? Rory, Persis and I shuffled back a few steps and casually glanced up at the ceiling or down at the floor. Perhaps they wouldn't think that we were with her. Plus, I was a little irked that she had called me her friend. At best, we were frenemies. The boy didn't look pleased at being called my man. He gave Olive a very cool, appraising look, which took in her grimy skin, her ragged clothes, and her unkempt hair. "You can work for your keep if you like," he told her. "Can you clean?" "Oh gosh, yes, I love cleaning," Olive squealed with excitement. Then she clapped her hand over her mouth in shock. I think her Drawfinia Cinderella character was taking over, because I was pretty sure that in our world, Olive didn't like cleaning at all. Nevertheless, the boy handed her a rag and a wooden pail of cold water. She looked at it with disgust. "Oh no," Olive exclaimed. "This won't do at all. I need hot water, some soap, and a clean rag, not this." She threw the rag on the fire in the corner of the room, ripped one of her many patches from the skirt of her dress, revealing a new patch of a different pattern beneath it, and then tipped the cold water into a great black pot that hung on a pole above the fire to heat it. She looked happier than I had ever seen her, and at last the clothes we wore had some uses. I guess they only disintegrated when we tried to throw them away. She even began to hum. Within a few minutes she had hot soapy water and was sloshing it on every surface in the place. The 3 hairy men muttered in disgust and slipped out of the room, collecting sacks and pickaxes on their way out. As they passed, they stared hard at both Rory and me. Rory, Persis and I sat down at a table that was soaking wet and covered in suds. Olive ripped off another patch and swooped down on us, drying the table. Now she was singing out loud. I caught the boy's eye and he came over to join us. I wanted to ask him some questions. He sat next to me, and my tummy gave a little flip-flop as he smiled at me. Strange. Maybe I was getting sick. So, he said, I think you're strangers to Tylwyth Teg. It was almost impossible to say the name of this town without spitting. I moved slightly away. Yes, that's right, I replied. I wasn't sure how much information to give him, but that much seemed safe enough. When your servant finishes cleaning, I'll get her to bring some food from our kitchen to your chamber if you like. My mother is making lunch now, he suggested. Our servant? We all stared at him and then burst out laughing. What's so funny? He wanted to know. Persis shook her head, still smiling. That's Olive, she explained. She's not our servant, she's our friend. Her voice trailed off uncertainly. What could she say? That we had followed Bridget to the land of Drolfinia, where we had become characters from fairy tales. That our schoolyard enemy had come with us and suddenly liked cleaning, which was totally out of character. She just really likes housework, I butted in. But some food would be wonderful. Oh, and a room with a shower, please. A shower? He looked amazed. Do you mean you want to sleep outside and wait for a brief fall of rain? It seemed that plumbing in Drolfinia was not going to be what we were used to. No, thank you. I mean, just some hot water to wash in, please. I tried again. Okay, we can manage that, said the boy, smiling, and my tummy flip-flopped again. And my mother will soon have some vegetable stew and bread ready for you.